Hello and welcome to 3-Inning Fan, the podcast with me, Kelley Franco. It is almost the end of January and pitchers and catchers report in 2 weeks. Can you believe it? We have a great show for you today. We're going to check up on the latest Pete Alonso analysis, and then we're going to check in with the Yankees too. And then we're going to take a look at MLB's use of Robo-Umps in spring training. And we're also going to look at the pros and cons of adopting a hard salary cap in baseball. I'm going to add my insight that comes with my almost 30 years of practicing law. Boy, am I old. And, you know, I kind of like the fact that the hot stove is currently the not stove right now because it gives us a little bit of time to explore some of these other issues that we don't normally have the time to address. I know you're going to love it. Let's start off with the Mets. First, the soap opera of As the Pete Alonso Turns. Pete Alonso was the name on everyone's lips, okay? And Steve Cohen really knocked it out of the park at Amazin Day last weekend while addressing the fans. Cohen spoke directly to the fans. The crowd booed David Stearns on the issue, and then they started chanting Pete Alonso's name, and the crowd mentality seemed to be turning into like a Pete Alonso flash mob that was going to break out. But then it took a turn. Cohen took the mic and he addressed the crowd directly. He said the negotiations had been exhausting and even harder than the Juan Soto negotiations. And he said he didn't like the structures that were presented to him. And that was the word he used. He said the structures were asymmetrical against him. I took this reference to structures to mean opt-outs. Why? Because Pete is asking, we understand, for player opt-outs. And that means if he has a good year, he can opt out and test the free agent market. But if he has a bad year, he can stay with the Mets, and the Mets can't do anything about it. So after Cohen spoke, the crowd applauded. He totally turned them around. I was impressed with Cohen's directness, and you know what? The crowd loved it. New Yorkers, they're smart, and they don't like BS, and sometimes they just want an explanation, and in this case, it worked. They know Pete didn't have a great year, and they know he turned down a solid offer in 2023 that he should have taken, and that he's rejected some of the overtures from the club this offseason as well, so they heard a reasonable explanation from Cohen, and they appreciated it. What I think was so genius about Steve Cohen's comments was that he left the door the tiniest bit ajar for Pete Alonso. Okay, that was the first thing. And then the second thing was, you know, Pete was listening, okay? Cohen essentially spoke directly to Pete Alonso while taking his agent, Scott Boras, out of the equation. He didn't have to use Scott Boras as the go-between. And you know what? I have said all along that despite the shenanigans, I do think Pete Alonso returns to the Mets. And this may have been the moment when the tide turned. Can it happen? Can they strike a deal and then there's a big welcome back to Pete Alonso and all is forgotten? I think it can, and I think it will. Have I been wrong before? No, I've never been wrong. There was some laughing on the crew on that one. Pete hitched his wagon to Scott Boras' star, and things have gone south since then. All indications are that Boras' focus was on Juan Soto this offseason. Boras got him a great deal, and Pete Alonso, the polar bear, was left out in the cold. I think that owners don't like dealing with Boras and that his clients suffer as a result. Well, what about Juan Soto's $765 million, you might ask? The $765 million deal for Soto was the result of an arms race between two baseball titans, Steve Cohen and Hal Steinbrenner. And Soto and Boras benefited greatly from that. In our everyday lives, it's like if you have a house and there are just two buyers who both really want it and they keep bidding it up. The house goes for more than you expected it to go for. And you know what? Good for Soto. I have absolutely no issue with him earning his money. But I don't think you can transpose that and say, hey, Scott Boras is a great agent. He gets huge contracts for his players. You have Pete and also Alex Bregman, who are still out there dangling. And last year, you had Blake Snell, Montgomery, Chapman, and Bellinger, who were left dangling. The Pete Alonso situation is looking like another black eye for Boras. It would be a shame if Pete Alonso signed late like Montgomery and Snell last year and had a bad year, and then he'd be in the same pickle next year. It would have consequences not only for his wallet, but for any legacy he hoped to build. He may not recover from 2 down years in a row. Scott Boras, in my opinion, he works great for the mega stars, but not so much for the regular stars or the mini stars. I have to wonder if Cohen and Stearns are thinking of Boras, okay, well, we had to pay up to get Soto. You got us there, but you used all your firepower on that one. Maybe they don't like the way Boras dealt with them, and now they're throwing it back at him. The Mets offseason started off with a huge bang, and now, honestly, it's been kind of a disappointment. They need a bat to protect Soto. Maybe Vientos can fill that role, but we just don't know. Soto had a great year last year, batting right in front of Aaron Judge. And if he doesn't get protection, he's going to set a record for walks. And you don't want to see a waste of Juan Soto. Soto was lured with this idea that Cohen would spend anything to build a championship team around him. And also, of course, $765 million, a private suite, and all sorts of other stuff. And there's still time to build a championship team around him, but there haven't been any super exciting offseason acquisitions besides him. The Soto acquisition was not value-driven, but everything else this offseason for the Mets has been. Stearns could still have a trick up his sleeve, and we just don't know about it yet. And that trick could be Pete Alonso. And the only barrier could be that Pete Alonso might need to swallow his pride. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my very good ex-friends. That's Mets Bob. How about Wayne Tyson and Cliff Wolf? These guys are so supportive of everything I do. Thank you, Bobby, Wayne, and Cliff, for being really, really good friends. Let's hop in with the Yankees for a minute. The Yankees are looking pretty good, except that they have not resolved their infield issue. I don't like any combination of second and third base that includes DJ LeMahieu. And right now, that's probably what you're looking at least if the season were going to start today. We're probably looking at Chisholm at second and DJ at third. The Yankees need to trade for Arenado or make another plan because I do think that DJ's best days are behind him. And besides all of that, I think they need a lefty reliever still. Let's take a minute to talk about all of the lefty relievers the Yankees have in their bullpen. That's right, none. Tim Hill was the most likely candidate, but they didn't get him inked, and now there are rumors the Mets might be making a play for him. Overall, I like where the Yankees are in the AL East. Yes, they lost Soto, but they made upgrades to their bullpen. They signed Devin Williams. They upgraded their starting rotation and adding Max Fried. And they have brought in Bellinger and Goldschmidt, 2 former MVPs, who will add value to their fielding and also to their lineup. Max Fried has a very high ground ball rate, especially to third base, so a sure pair of hands on the hot corner would avoid some fielding embarrassment by the Yankees. As for the rest of the AL East, look, the Red Sox made some great moves this offseason. They traded for Garrett Crochet and they signed Walker Buehler. And you know what? They're going to be better than last year, and they may not be done. The Orioles haven't done much. They lost Anthony Santander and Corbin Burns, and the Blue Jays gained Santander, but haven't been able to ink Pete Alonso or extend Vladdy Guerrero. And you know what? The Rays are just happy to have a place to play. So I'm feeling optimistic about the Yankees so far in the AL East in 2025. I wish there were more to discuss about the Yankees, but there isn't. And we don't make up news to fill the airwaves here at 3 Inning Fan. So let's move on to some super interesting stuff that you need to know about. And the first thing is Robo-Umps. MLB is going to be testing Robo-Umps in spring training. The official name for Robo-Umps is ABS, the Automated Ball Strike System. But let's face it, we're just going to call them Robo-Umps. They've been in use in the minor leagues before, but not yet in the majors. The incomparable Evan Drellich of The Athletic wrote a great piece on the Robo-Ump experiment, and you should go check it out. It's up right now. It was chock full of information, and I'm going to pass some of it on to you here. The Robo-Umps won't be used on every call. You're still going to have a human umpire behind the plate, so it's not going to be like R2-D2 back there. So the human umpire will be making the calls. But what's going to happen is, at least in this spring training, the teams are going to have 2 challenges a game. And so it's basically like an appeal. They can appeal to the Robo-Ump if they don't like the human ump's call. And if the call is overturned, then the team keeps their challenge. They don't lose it. So Evan Drellich said in his piece, and I found this fascinating because I was wondering about it, and maybe you were too. Every player will have his measurements taken. Nope, no need to hold your stomach in. It's just the height measurement that will be taken. And in case you think they can just slouch to create a smaller strike zone, no, because they're going to do both manual and biomechanical analyses, so they can't game the system. Chances are we haven't met yet, but let me just tell you, if I had to be measured for my strike zone, I'd be closer to Eddie Goodell than Aaron Judge. So, of course, Robo-Umps are going to have a standard strike zone, no matter what the pitch and what the count. But Evan Drellich wrote this, and this is incredibly interesting. The numbers show that in MLB, the human umps measure the strike zone at 550 square inches on a 3-0 count, but on an 0-2 count, 412 square inches. Isn't that wild? The human element squeezes the batter at 0-2. ABS is set at 443 square inches, no matter what the count. Drellich also relayed that Commissioner Manfred has said that the human strike zone tends to be an oval, kind of an oblong oval, but an oval. But the ABS strike zone is going to be the textbook sharp rectangle cornered strike zone that's in the rule book. So we could see ABS be more pitcher friendly for the corners, but for the up and down part of the strike zone, I think it's going to be more hitter friendly. We have this spring training experiment, and we could see Robo-Umps in MLB as early as 2026, meaning the MLB regular season games. What do I think? I think the time has come, and I don't say that lightly. I don't like removing the human element from the game, but we have these umpires who do their job correctly like 98% of the time. Okay, I kind of made up that number, but you got to admit, it's got to be pretty close to that because they really do their job correctly most of the time. But when they don't, they get absolutely killed if it's in a big situation. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for the pitcher who got called out when he shouldn't, or the batter who got called out when he shouldn't have, or the pitcher who got a walk when he shouldn't have. It's bad for the ump. So I think that the ABS system will help everybody. The entire world has the benefit of watching replays on pitches, except the one dude who's got to make the call. The one guy whose opinion matters can't look at a replay. It doesn't make sense. And for the record, I hate that this is my opinion. The worst part, I was raised on Billy Martin, Earl Weaver, Lou Piniella, and I still enjoy a good manager tantrum today. Looking at you, Aaron Boone. I'm going to miss those tantrums. As someone on Twitter said when I was tweeting about this, Aaron Boone might just tackle the Robo-Ump. Okay, we're going to talk about the idea of a hard salary cap in baseball and the collective bargaining agreement shenanigans that might be involved in that, okay? So there's a lot of talk about salary caps in baseball right now after the monster off season the Dodgers have had. And of course, they had a monster off season last off season, and they wound up winning the World Series. So people are getting kind of worked up about this. Oh, the Dodgers are just going to buy their way to a World Series. But I don't think a hard salary cap is the answer for a few reasons. First, let's look at this from 20,000 feet, okay? Baseball already has what's called a soft salary cap, which is the competitive balance tax, known informally as the CBT or just the luxury tax. If owners spend beyond certain thresholds, they have to pay the tax, and that tax gets redistributed among certain other clubs who didn't spend as much. Baseball doesn't have a hard salary cap, which is a ceiling that caps how much a team can spend for players' salaries. The NHL, the NBA, the NFL, these leagues already have hard salary caps. For example, the NFL cap in 2024 was $255.4 million. MLB is the only major U.S. sports league without a hard salary cap. So why don't I think we should have one? A few reasons. For starters, I would like to see clubs who don't spend to field a competitive team to do so. Some of these teams have payrolls they should be ashamed of. And even though every owner isn't as rich as Steve Cohen or the Guggenheim Group of the Dodgers, most of them are billionaires or probably billionaires. So, hey, rich guys, go spend some money and stop whining about the people who are spending money. I'll pick on the Pittsburgh Pirates, okay? They have a payroll of about $63 million, and they're almost always near the bottom of the payroll rankings. Their owner is Robert Nutting, who is estimated to be worth $1 billion. You know what? I am much more troubled by the Robert Nuttings of the MLB owners world than I am of the Steve Cohens or the Guggenheim Groups, or even the Hal Steinbrenners. So that leads us to this idea that some people say we need a salary floor, not a salary cap, or both a salary floor and a salary cap. And that's when we need to start talking about the CBA negotiations. What's the CBA? The CBA is the collective bargaining agreement between players and owners, and the current one expires at the end of the 2026 season. The players and owners are what we would call labor and management if we transpose this to, say, the auto industry workers setting. So, granted, there are a lot more zeros on the ends of the salaries when it comes to baseball, but it's still labor and management. So when a deal needs to be renegotiated, they got to renegotiate it and reach a deal, or else you have a strike or a lockout. And I don't want to see that in baseball because it would risk losing the 2027 season. all or part of it. I don't think the players' union would ever accept a hard salary cap, and certainly not without a hard salary floor. And if owners or players draw a hard line in the sand on a cap or a floor, you're looking at risking losing the 2027 season due to a failure to get to an agreement. I really believe that. You have to be, if you're going to pound your fist, and say, we've got to have a hard salary cap, I really think you have to be prepared to lose the 2027 season. And to complicate things further, it's not just players versus owners. It is going to be owners versus owners, and in some cases, players versus players, although the latter would probably be a little more behind closed doors. So, on owners versus owners, the big market club owners aren't going to want a hard salary cap, but maybe some of the little spenders do. It'll make it easier for them to compete without spending as much. And as for the players, well, the mega stars get mega contracts. They're not going to want a hard cap. But you know what? Some of the rank and file players who are never going to be stars might not mind a salary cap if it means they get a salary floor, because the little guys benefit from the floor. Everybody has an angle. So what do? Nothing? I have one idea. I think a more feasible proposition that could get some traction would be to require in the next CBA that deferred payments count in full toward the luxury tax calculations, instead of just counting the net present value of these deferred contracts toward the luxury tax calculations. For example, Ohtani's contract was $700 million, okay? But it was almost entirely deferred. So the net present value of Ohtani's contract that they used for the luxury tax calculations was $460 million. I think you could see some agitation that the entire salary amount, not just the net present value, be used for the luxury tax calculations in the next collective bargaining agreement. This would put more pressure on clubs that utilize deferred payments. And we all know that the Dodgers do that to a tremendous extent, and maybe it will stave off some of the criticism against the Dodgers, and it might also be a compromise that could be reached. If you want to open up a hard salary cap and a hard salary floor discussion, you could be opening a Pandora's box. And you know what else? I just don't think we need to get all worked up about the Dodgers yet. Yes, it's annoying that they signed all the good players. Believe me, it bothers me too. But MLB hasn't had a repeat champ since the Yankees three-peated between 1998 and 2000. So let's not get too carried away yet. If the Dodgers win it again in 2025, I might change my mind, which is a woman's prerogative. And if they win it again in 2026, well, then it'll be just in time to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreement, and maybe the salary floor and cap issue will be on the front burner. All right, let's close it up with, as we always do, what's good to eat while watching the ball game. Now, it's the off season, so we take some liberties because we can't watch a ball game. And so we're going to take our liberties even a step further today and talk about what's good to drink while not watching the ball game. And today's drink is my favorite winter cocktail, the Maple Old Fashioned. It's my signature cocktail at home. So whenever you talk about bourbon, the first question people always ask is, which one? One bourbon that I always enjoy is called Noble Oak. It's aged in a sherry cask, and the cask imbues a beautiful kind of sherry flavor to the bourbon. And it's also reasonably priced at about $40 a bottle. Not that that's nothing, but there are some bourbons you can spend a tremendous amount of money on. And I think that it's actually very good value at that price point, given how wonderful it tastes. So here's how I make my maple old fashioned. I put about 7 shakes of bitters in a glass, and then I add a teaspoon of awesome pure maple syrup and a teaspoon of water, and I mix it up so it's kind of all blends together. And then I put a big rock in. If you don't have big ice cube trays, you should get some because it'll cost you like $5. And I love the big rock because it doesn't water down my drink. Then I add about 3 ounces by weight of bourbon, but I do occasionally have what I call a happy accident, which is when more bourbon accidentally falls into my glass. Oops. I then add a twist of orange peel, and the pièce de résistance are Luxardo cherries that I add as a garnish. Delicious and Italian, the Luxardo cherries bear no relation to those neon red maraschino cherries we grew up with. Making a cocktail is a beautiful ritual, especially if it's enjoyed in front of the fire on a winter's night and preferably with a good dog. Bottoms up. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.